The US government owes a total of $31.4 trillion in debt. That's trillion with 12 zeros. To visualize that, if you had a pile of $31.4 trillion made up of $100 bills, the height of the pile would be the equivalent of 3,875 Mount Everests. Yet on January 19th, the US government reached their debt ceiling, meaning that constitutionally, the US Treasury is not allowed to borrow any more money to fund government spending. So what happens now? Well, the debt ceiling was introduced to represent a limit on how much the government can borrow, but the debt ceiling is sort of like how your diet always starts tomorrow. When tomorrow comes, the day of reckoning is pushed further and further into the future. That's why since 2002, the debt ceiling has been raised 20 times to allow government spending to continue relatively unchecked. Now that the ceiling has once again been reached, Biden states that the issue of raising the ceiling is not negotiable, whilst the Republicans are hesitant to agree without any spending reforms. Watch till the end of the video to find out what happens if the debt ceiling really isn't raised this time, and why this is all the mark of a self-proliferating debt cycle in which the US cannot escape from. To understand the debt ceiling, we have to understand what the US government spends money on. The US currently runs a deficit, meaning that they spend more money than they make. And for the 2022 calendar year, this deficit was around $1.4 trillion, which is actually down by 50% from 2020, where spending was sky high due to several COVID-related measures. But this isn't anything new. In fact, the last time the US ran a surplus, where revenues exceeded spending, was in 2001. But what does the US government actually spend on? Last year, the US spent a total of $6.3 trillion, and this spending can be split into 4 categories. Mandatory spending, which is spending mandated by law. This includes things like healthcare related spending, such as Medicare and Medicaid, and social security spending. Then you have discretionary spending, which must be approved by Congress and the President each year. This includes things like defense spending, education, training, social services, and transport. Supplemental spending is similar to discretionary spending, but for funds that need to be spent immediately, such as on the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, there's the interest payments on national debt, and this is where things get scary. But first, we have to understand who the US actually borrows money from.
I need to borrow some money.
When the US government spends more money than it makes, it has to borrow. To do this, the government sells securities such as bonds, bills, notes, which are essentially IOUs that pay interest. They sell these to the general public such as banks, investors, pension funds, foreign governments such as Japan, China and the UK, and even the Federal Reserve is a buyer when there's not enough demand for these securities elsewhere. Last year, the US government paid $475 billion in interest payments on their debt alone, which was a 35% increase from the year before and represents nearly 10% of the government's total annual revenue. This rise is primarily due to a higher amount of outstanding debt and much higher interest rates. With interest rates rising, as more debt is rolled over at these higher rates, the total interest payments owed are only going to get higher and higher. With the global economy slowing down, the US government is going to collect less revenue through taxes. And other sources of income, such as Fed remittances, will be less impactful as the Federal Reserve is actually losing money. This means that the government deficit will continue to get wider. So what is the solution to plug this gap? While spending can be decreased, austerity isn't too popular if you want to get voted in next election. So the only realistic option is to borrow more money, further contributing to the deficit. To do this, the debt ceiling must be raised. But what happens if the debt ceiling isn't raised? Well, global turmoil is the simple answer. If the US doesn't raise the debt ceiling, this means that it won't be able to pay off the interest on its debt and essentially defaults. Confidence in the US dollar's role as the global reserve currency would diminish. The global financial system, which runs on US debt, would be in turmoil. Sections of the government, such as defense, the healthcare system, and education, would not function. The magnitude of unrest would be significant, which is why the US has never officially defaulted on its debt. Except, technically it has, on numerous occasions, but that's a topic for a future video. So essentially the US has to raise the debt limit. But this isn't the end of the problem, and definitely not a sustainable solution, but more of a delay of the inevitable. And this leads us to the debt spiral. Within the US budget, only about 30% of spending is discretionary, which can be decreased. The rest is either mandatory or payments on interest, both of which must be paid. Much of the spending within the mandatory category, such as Social Security, will keep going up due to cost of living adjustments which go up in relation to inflation. Interest payments will continue to increase with higher interest rates and are expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2025, which would represent over 20% of total US revenues spent on just the payments on their interest. So US government spending isn't going to come down. Therefore, the Treasury will need to keep issuing more debt to pay for all this spending. But if more debt is issued, the government will have greater interest payments on this debt, leading to more borrowing, leading to more interest payments, leading to more borrowing, and so on. This is the inescapable debt spiral that the US and many other countries face, and it's not pretty. So yes, the government will raise the debt ceiling, and they will keep doing so again and again and again until this cycle of debt inevitably comes to a crashing end. Thank you for watching Olive Stripe Productions. If you enjoyed this video and want to see future videos on a wide range of exciting relevant topics, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to be notified of future videos.